Okay, guys, just to remind you, today your assignments are due. Remember to turn in your Journal 7. Make sure you turn in that Constitution as a Counter Revolution. Those are both due by 11:59 tonight. Yesterday we left off with George Washington as president, and we covered his farewell address. With that farewell address, Washington is no longer president, and we are moving forward. One of the pieces that we have to make sure we focus on is the issues that the United States runs into. One of the biggest issues that we run into in the very beginning is the finances of our nation. When we think about the Revolutionary War turned our finances upside down. We know that war is expensive. So what we had to then figure out is, how do we start this new nation with the incredible amount of war debt that we have without ruining the economy before we even get started? So the question then becomes, how do we pay the debts without causing inflation and move forward? When Washington becomes president, he creates that cabinet. His Secretary of the Treasury is Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton is a self-made man. He is going to look towards a more modern capitalist economy. Capitalist meaning the people have some freedom of choice, which again ties into our democracy. He has some connections to the elite because his wife was from the elite wealthy class, but he is going to push to figure out how to get these finances in order for the United States. His first issue was, what is public credit? We have to pay back the public for the Revolutionary War, and that had not been done. Today you think about it, and when soldiers go to war, they get paid, right? If there was damages, God forbid there were ever damages during the war here, that would be reimbursed by the government. That hadn't happened in the Revolutionary War under the Articles of Confederation. So in order to legitimize this federal government, we have to start paying the states. We have to start figuring out how to solve these problems. Where is that money going to come from? Well, Alexander Hamilton is going to propose a Bank of the United States modeled after the British, who had a stable currency, who had a stable economy. This would make manufacturers self-sufficient. Agriculture exports would be taken care of. They would be regulated through this bank. But the question becomes, why would we pay for foreign goods? Why would we want these regulated trades, anything like that, when we could buy them here? Alexander Hamilton thought he had a solution to this with the National Bank in supporting American-made products and these manufacturers taking off government regulations of them, and then maybe we wouldn't buy from the British. We would buy our own. And the way you encourage people to buy goods from your own country is by giving subsidies or handouts from the government to businesses to inspire them to open, and by passing tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods. All of this would come through strict regulation from the federal government, the making of a national bank, the paying back from the Revolutionary War, the subsidies for business, the tariffs. All of this would use a lot of power from the federal government, which caused some controversy. It was very controversial at the time. I want you to take a listen here, because there is a great documentary on Hamilton from the History Channel. It's called Hamilton Building America. I want you to think about, what does Hamilton create, and what effect does this creation have on the United States?
1789. The Constitution is ratified by the former colonies, and General George Washington is elected unanimously as the first president of the United States. Now, Washington faces a series of decisions that are critical to the nation's future. He must choose his cabinet members, the small cadre of men who will help him forge a new country. Alexander Hamilton, now 34 years old, served as Washington's close aide, both in the heat of battle and negotiating with the Continental Congress. But it's Hamilton's keen command of economics that convinces Washington to choose him as the fledgling nation's first Secretary of the Treasury.
After the Revolution, he does the legal work for one of the first banks in the United States, the Bank of New York, which still exists. So Hamilton did have a lot of experience with the world of money and trade.
The idea of encouraging private enterprise is a part of Hamilton's vision for the nation.
Finance and credit to him wasn't just one little aspect of domestic policy. I think to Hamilton, finance was pretty much what the national government was going to be.
At the time, each state has its own monetary system, like 13 separate countries, resulting in constantly fluctuating and inconsistent exchange rates, crippling commerce as many merchants simply refuse currencies from distant states.
Some states were still using shillings, Spanish money circulated, so there was a lot of chaos.
It made doing business really quite hard. It also added an element of instability to the economy.
To solve the problem, Hamilton proposes the creation of a national mint to issue a unified central currency. His plans even include design details. A bald eagle and the word liberty will appear on every gold, silver, and copper coin.
He felt that by having a national currency would facilitate trade amongst the states, which is true. And you'd also facilitate trade abroad, which is also true. I think he also had a more abstract notion in mind, which was that if you had a national currency, that would help promote the idea of national identity.
On April 2nd, 1792, Congress passes the Coinage Act, creating a new U.S. dollar and a mint to produce it. Just 3 years into his term as Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton has won a series of personal and political victories that not only fueled the economy and helped lower the national debt, but also secure his vision of a sovereign federal government.
Getting elected president.
So, when we think about what Alexander Hamilton did here, he didn't just create the national bank. He creates expectations and ideas within the United States that would bring us together, minting the money from the federal government, having one currency that unites the country, inspiring manufacturing. That's going to push the United States to industrialize. What Hamilton was doing was very controversial at the time, but it's also going to push the United States to become the powerhouse that they are. The problem becomes not everybody wants this national bank. Not everybody wants the federal government to have these controls. So when Hamilton proposes the national bank, Jefferson is going to really come down hard on the ideas and oppose the national bank. One of the biggest pieces that Jefferson and Madison both say is a bad idea that is not practical is this repayment of the debt. Most of Congress is going to approve it. It does get approved, the congressional plan to have public repayment of the debt. But Jefferson argued that in the Constitution, there is nowhere that says the federal government can create a national bank. So he is a very strict reader of the Constitution in that way. He also helped write the Constitution, so he knew what the words within the Constitution meant. But Hamilton is going to have a much loose reader of the Constitution and say, this falls under the elastic clause. The national bank is both necessary and proper to bring the United States together and to make us stronger. What ultimately this controversy over the national bank illustrates is this back and forth interpretation of the Constitution, strict versus loose. That's the Regent's question. What does the National Bank illustrate? A strict versus loose interpretation of the Constitution, the argument over how to read the Constitution. The National Bank is also going to split the country based on North versus South. The North is going to become very industrial. It's going to be business. The South is farming. It's the plantations. Who does the National Bank help? It is going to favor the merchants. It's going to favor the businessmen, giving them those subsidies to inspire their business here in the United States to make products instead of purchasing it from our rival, the British. Farmers don't see the same benefit. They say, where's my subsidy? Where is my help from the government? Well, the National Bank didn't do that. So you have this split between North versus South. You also have this split between merchants and farmers. And you're also going to have this split in who do we believe in? What government do we believe? You're going to have the one side that argues for the National Bank and says there should be a strong executive branch. There should be a strong judiciary branch. There should be just overall a strong federal government. On the flip side of that, people are going to argue, no, the power belongs with the people, with democracy, with the legislature, not the federal government executive, not the federal government Supreme Court, but instead with the real voice of the people, which is that legislative branch. So you have this argument within federalism as well. Should there be a strong federal government over the state government here? The controversy over the National Bank is going to divide us here in the United States. We also are going to have to contend with some pretty hefty outside forces as the United States is passing the Constitution and coming into its own. When we look at this map, when I say the frontier, I mean the gray area that you see. Okay, that is what we call the frontier during this time. The frontier could also be the purple, but right now that is Spain. It's not really the United States frontier, but that gray area from where the outline of the 13 states is to the Mississippi River, land that we gained after the Revolutionary War. It's called the frontier because it's unorganized territory. Out there, you have the British remaining in their forts. You have the Native Americans. These two groups don't want the United States to organize this territory. What's going to end up happening is the United States wants to expand. We have to contend with the Native Americans and the British, and we have to figure out how do we successfully overcome these obstacles, because the British, when they remained, were supplying the Native Americans with arms and supports to make sure that any Americans didn't make it past the Appalachian Mountains. It's as if they were still trying to enforce the proclamation line all the way back from the French and Indian War. So the British kind of teamed up with the Native Americans, giving them weapons to make sure that the United States couldn't organize that territory. The French Revolution is going to happen during this time as well. In the beginning, there was an expectation that the United States would pick a side during the French Revolution. Would we support the revolutionaries? Would we support the government of France? Ultimately, we're going to decide to stay out of it because we are, quite frankly, no help with anybody. But to continue, there's also tensions between France and England. War is going to be conducted between the two, and England is going to expect the United States to back them. France is going to be expecting the United States to back them as well. But again, the United States has to kind of duck out of this conflict because we hadn't completely recovered from our own revolution. So how would we be able to help the French or the English? But what puts us in a terrible position is the United States is going to be trading with France and England because ultimately we want to make money. What the British do is attempt to punish us for trading with the French. They begin seizing our ships. They attempt to control our trade. What we are going to have to negotiate to get the British kind of off our back is the Jay Treaty in 1794 to 1795. John Jay is going to go to the British, and he is going to have to negotiate with them to stop seizing our ships that were headed to France. And he kind of comes up with a terrible negotiation here. What Jay ultimately negotiates with the British is that they can seize our ships that are headed to France, but they have to pay us for them, which isn't wonderful. But what we were concerned about is the trade. We wanted to trade with both the French and the English in their conflict to make more money. We didn't really care who the goods made it to as long as we made money off of it. So when Jay argues and gets this treaty and says to the British, you can take our ships, just make sure we get paid, this is going to be an incredibly unpopular treaty that's negotiated. It makes us look really weak because we're allowing the British to just steal from us. But the reason that we make this treaty is we wanted peace with the British. We could not get into another conflict with the British, so we kind of have to let them do whatever they would like to do. If that means stealing our ships and we make money still, then that's what's going to have to happen. We are going to hold an election in 1796. In 1796, Washington is going to give his farewell address, and the next president to come in is going to be either a Federalist or a Democratic Republican. The Federalists are going to be supporters of a strong federal party. Adams is going to be the Federalist candidate. He is going to be supported by Hamilton. He is going to have the support of merchants, the commercial economy, more urban, really the northern states. The Democratic Republicans, on the other hand, are really going to push for more ordinary people and their ideas, and the farmers, really the leaders of the tobacco elites. You have Jefferson, you have Madison. In the election of 1796, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans are going to face off. The Federalists are going to run a campaign that says the Democratic Republicans support the French Revolution. And the Democratic Republicans are going to say that the Federalists are this group of elitists. Now, this argument, the Federalists saying that the Democratic Republicans support the French Revolution, is supposed to make the people think that if a Democratic Republican were to win, they would try to sabotage our government here. The Democratic Republicans saying that the Federalists are elitists were supposed to lead the people to connect the Federalists to a king, a monarchy, the rich that don't understand anything that you're doing. Ultimately, what this does is it splits the country. You have New England, who is supporting our Federalist John Adams, and you have the southern states supporting Jefferson, the Democratic Republican. Now, get this. This used to be a crazy idea, but whoever was the first place winner in the Electoral College for the presidency got to be president. The vice president was the second place candidate in the Electoral College. So what we end up here with is Adams will be the president as a Federalist, and Jefferson will be the vice president as a Democratic Republican. So we get this kind of mixed administration anyway. Adams is going to run into some foreign affairs that don't necessarily do him any favors. Because the French are in this war with England, they're having the revolution happening, Adams is going to have to send some representatives to France, these diplomats, to negotiate and try to figure out what does our relationship look like. France had started seizing our ships because they wanted the goods that we had. The United States can't let the French walk all over us. The goal of the diplomats was to try to figure out how do we trade soundly without making the British angry, without making the French angry, and really get us all on the same page. Well, when we send our diplomats to France, the French representatives, who become known as X, Y, and Z anonymously in history, they try to bribe the United States. They demand money from us. And our diplomats say to the French representatives, absolutely not. We are honorable citizens. Uh, and this becomes known as the XYZ affair. And what it ultimately does is it pins the Federalists against the French. And they say those French tried to take advantage of our honor. They tried to bribe us. What it inspires back here in the United States when we say the French are these bad group of people that tried to bribe and beat up on the United States, it allows Adams to increase taxes and strengthen our army and our navy because we wanted to protect ourselves from the big bad French. So the XYZ affair is just one of those pieces in foreign affairs during the Adams administration that kind of illustrates this propaganda, this spin to the United States of the French are so bad. Well, don't notice when I raise your taxes. And they didn't. They allowed Adams to raise those taxes, and the Army and the Navy grew. But if we know anything about the United States, we hate our taxes being raised, and that is going to affect Adams down the line. During the Adams administration, and I want you to put a star next to this because this is a big one, the Alien and Sedition Acts are going to be passed. These are a series of laws known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. Alien here meaning foreigner, immigrant. Sedition refers to speech. It is a type of speech. The definition really refers to negative speech against the government. So what do these laws do? What these laws do is they give the power to the federal government to deport any immigrants that spoke poorly against the government. It also made it very difficult for immigrants to vote. It went from a 5-year process to vote to a 14-year process. And the reason being is the Federalists, Adams is a Federalist, saw foreigners as a very massive threat. They didn't want the foreigners voting. They didn't want the immigrants here. So instead, they're going to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts, and the government is going to take complete control here. At first, there really wasn't a lot of public opposition. But the more you think about this, and the more the Sedition Acts kind of grew, the Sedition Acts were going to be used by the Federalists to keep the Democratic Republicans silent. Because not only did sedition, this speech against the government, apply to foreigners, immigrants, it began to be applied by the government on our own citizens. So then these acts went as so far to say anybody who speaks out against the government can be arrested or face fines from the government. That goes against our First Amendment right. And with the First Amendment rights being violated, it inspires the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions to be passed. These Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are put in place to have the states override the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wait, judicial review exists. Can't they just declare the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional? Judicial review didn't exist during this time period. It's not actually going to be created for a little bit while longer. 1801 is when we're going to see judicial review start to become discussed again. So the states then had to declare federal laws unconstitutional. And they did that for the first time with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, declaring the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional. It was very controversial for the states to go against the federal power here, but it represents the first time that the states declared a federal act unconstitutional. So Alien Sedition Acts violate the people's rights. Kentucky and Virginia resolutions attempt to overturn those. Jefferson is going to be our next president. I'm going to do a little bit of Jefferson here, and then we're going to have to pick back up with this on Monday because I don't want to go over the 30 minutes. But Jefferson is going to win the election of 1800. And if you remember, Jefferson is going to be a Democratic Republican. So you have the first change of power between political parties here. And what's really interesting is this is the first time we've changed political parties, right? Washington, some people declare as a Federalist. Adams was a Federalist, but now we're switching to the Democratic Republicans. It could have gone very bad. And we could have seen a complete turn upside down as these two parties, one goes out, one comes in. But what Adams does is Adam moves out of the White House in the middle of the night, very, very quietly, very peacefully, and allows Jefferson to just seamlessly take over the presidency. No muss, no fuss, no nothing. And what this ultimately represents is a peaceful transfer of power, which is a precedent that was set in the changing of the tides here in 1800. And it is massive because now that is a precedent that we follow forever until January 6th. So it was this idea that you let the other party live another day. You don't rip the country apart because you can. Instead, you allow them to win. You allow it to happen. You leave. Let the winner win and the loser lose. Keep it going. What we do see during Jefferson's presidency, though, is Jefferson is going to push for what he will call Jeffersonian democracy. And what this really means is restoring power to the states, allowing the people's voice to be heard, really loosening the reins on the federal government. Remember, he's a strict reader of the Constitution, doesn't believe in a strong federal government, believes in a strong state government. And that will really carry through until the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. I'm going to stop right there because we'll dig into the Louisiana Purchase and the foreign affairs of Jefferson on Monday, just to keep us below 30 minutes here. Do not forget to submit your assignments tonight. Those assignments are your Journal 7 and your Constitution as a Counter-Revolution. You should have a couple minutes to work on those right now. Any questions, comments, concerns, send me a Teams chat, and I will do my best to answer you.